Okay. Good morning. How are you doing today, brother?
Good morning. How are you? I'm great.
Awesome. Awesome. Always good to see you. Always good to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you. My honor.
So we have a great group of students here to hear you speak. Um, as we've done in past classes, uh, uh, if you recall, we started this process where you actually came our very first time we offered this class in the very beginning, and I always thought that your words were so insightful, and in order for students to be best prepared to receive the message, it would be better to have us speak closer to the end of the class when students have actually learned who Dr. Washington is. And so, as you know, and they don't know, but I forwarded all of your presentations, and y'all wonder why'd I have y'all recorded. The easiest way to make sure someone can understand what who you are and what you're trying to say is if they can hear your own words. And so, because you recorded it, Professor Abuwi was able to listen and read your presentations, and I'm not going to steal any of his thunder regarding those presentations. But as we kick this off, I'd like to introduce Professor Marshall Washington Cabiness Abuwi. And I learned a few years, well, actually last year when we had our class, Dr. Washington's name really, overshadows a lot. And I was really constantly placing the Washington as the last name in his name. And over time, I gained an appreciation of not only the naming, but that importance. It speaks to his lineage. And as I alerted to everybody in the brief that I sent out to you, Professor Abuwi's great grandfather is Booker T. Washington, and his father is Marshall S. Cabiness, who was a Tuskegee Airman. And for those who have not had an opportunity to visit our sacred space, as I call it, also known as the cemetery, our burial grounds, you will actually find both Dr. Washington and Professor Abuwi's father, Marshall Cabiness, in our sacred space. And so you have the distinct honor of hearing from someone whose lineage runs deep through Tuskegee. Professor Abuwi is a former student at Tuskegee. He grew up in the community of Tuskegee, and as a result, he can speak to what the space that we all currently inhabit and attend, what it was like for him. Additionally, as someone who I know in our previous conversations has sought to internalize the legacy of his great grandfather in his own life, and has committed to do a number of things aligned with that legacy, he can bring a very unique perspective. And one of the things that I want to, right before he goes, I want to bring to your attention that really stuck out to me the first time I met him and heard him speak was that he had published a book. But he didn't just publish the book. His whole conversation was centered around how, in order to align himself with the legacy of Dr. Washington, he had to be the publisher, he had to be the distributor, he had to be the writer, and he came with a copy. And what I always appreciated about that was he was speaking about the process of being a self-starter, divesting ourselves from constantly looking at someone else to do our work by paying them, but really embodying that idea of being self-sustainability and self-empowerment through his own work. And in his own words said, in order to speak about Dr. Washington, you have to kind of walk in those shoes. And I am honored to be able to say that he's here joining us for our last class. And with that, I turn it over to Professor Abuwi.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Daniels, and thank you, class, for your attendance and my talk today. I want to be very succinct because there are a lot of questions that I have reviewed that I would like to address. But to begin with, before I go into those questions, I don't want to get into a lot of detail about myself, only because it would take up time away from what I really want to talk about is the message of Booker T. Washington. We're talking about the legacy, which puts Booker T. Washington's work and life in a more of a historical, even scholarly context. And hundreds, maybe thousands of people over the last 150 years have taken upon themselves to dissect and write and analyze his life, his philosophy, and his works. Well, I'm one of those scholars, but I'm not going to address that. My concern as we move into the second century after his work at Tuskegee is how can we apply the philosophy of building and doing for self and community construction and development to the needs of the African American community today. Now, I'm sitting in a beautiful, integrated neighborhood. I was one of the first persons to build a very beautiful 7-bedroom home, 2-story home in this neighborhood. I got a prime piece of property with a backyard large enough to practice my golf swing, not to actually practice driving, but pitching. I got a 45-yard stretch diagonally across my, so I have a nice piece of property. And the reason why I'm saying that is because I did not accomplish this by myself. I spent 30 years in the U.S. military in order to achieve the benefit of being able to qualify to have the VA guarantee a loan for me to buy this property. And many of the people in this neighborhood are veterans. And I'm saying all that to say that we had to become part of the integrated armed forces in order to achieve this level of a lifestyle. So I'm not a Black separatist. I would never have been able to have this in my retirement. I'm 78 years old. I never would have been able to achieve this style of life at my age if I had been a Black separatist, because the Black people, unfortunately, have still got a long ways to travel in terms of coming together as a unified community to be able to provide these kinds of opportunities. Even the capital that I had to borrow from, as far as I know, a predominantly white financial institution to finance the house. So the reality is that as you all leave Tuskegee, 99% of you, and I've looked at your presentations and I've heard you talk about your majors, and most of you are not economics majors, business management majors, industrial engineering majors. Most of you, I noticed one person was a nursing major. Some of you are social science majors. You're going to go to work as a social science major, probably for a social services department in some state or county or local government, unless you teach. And this is all going to be within what we would call today diverse integrated setting. So to put things in the proper context, even though, in my opinion, ideally, the African American community would be more like some of the other ethnic communities, like, for example, the Vietnamese, the Chinese, the Japanese, even the Mexican Americans and the Italians or Polish. They would have enough strength and unity within their communities where diversity in a larger setting would not be a big issue because they could go to their own people, as the Irish and the Poles and the Italians have done for over 100 years. If Johnny finished high school and he wasn't interested in going to college, but he was interested in working in the family business, whatever it might be, oil imports, oil like the cooking oil, textiles, he would tell his daddy, as Uncle Salvatore, if he'll let me apprentice for him, because that family had the kind of business opportunity waiting. We don't have that, unfortunately, in most cases. So we graduate with our degrees and we use different employment resources, friends that may be already employed somewhere or other avenues. And we go along with others and we fill out applications or send in resumes and we get hired. At Tuskegee, obviously, we have recruiters coming there several times a year looking for the best and the brightest. And you don't have to go out on a job search. But we're going into an environment where we struggle. Sometimes the glass ceiling, or whatever ceiling you want to call it, doesn't hit us until we get in our 50s and we're competing for the top spot. And we find that somebody who spends weekends at some executive's estate, enjoying lounging around the pool and drinking Chianti or beer or whatever, and enjoying the camaraderie of being part of the in crowd, we're not part of that crowd, only maybe as a token. And so except when they want that one person to be presented as a breakthrough individual, we're put on the sideline. Many of our people, and I have classmates that fell into this position, they end up getting frustrated and take early retirement, never reaching their full potential. Many of them have doctorate degrees. I'm not trying to sound negative about your future. You may be able to be the one that gets to the top, as some of our people have. But my point is that the education at Tuskegee should make you aware of the realities. The struggle still continues. Just because you have a bachelor's, master's, or a doctorate degree from Tuskegee or some other school doesn't mean that life is going to be a bowl of cherries. It's always going to be a struggle for Black people until we have a power base to be able to build our own narrative and own reality. Now, here's my point. As I looked at your presentations, those that I could hear, I listened to, I was impressed, as I had told Dr. Daniels earlier before we began. I was very impressed with your diligence, your scholarship, great research. I'm a research teacher, and I can easily recognize quality research. And yours is very quality, high quality. But one thing that I have to admit, I agonized over this really last night. I spent a good portion of the night reading your presentations, is that maybe one or two, but not most, address the economic philosophy of Booker T. Washington. Many address the social issues that he confronted back in his day. They're still very relevant today. Many of them are very, very relevant, coming to be more relevant in the last 2 or 3 years. But Booker T. Washington primarily was an economic, forward-thinking apostle of progress. And if you go over to the Booker T. Washington Monument in the center of the campus, and the campus has really moved over in that direction, but it used to be the big, what I call central spot, and I guess probably still is. And you look at the base of the monument, take time if you have never been over there. It will be very insightful. It says he lifted the veil of ignorance from his people and pointed the way to progress through education and industry. And the key word to there of progress, education, and industry. Progress is forward-looking. Education is global. And industry is what we lack. Can I get an amen? I'm a preacher. I had to say that. Industry is what we lack. And industry is what makes the world turn around. You can have all of the PhDs, double and triple PhDs, master's degree, bachelor's degree holders. But if you don't have any industry to finance their research, which industry finances 95% of all research, either that or the federal government defense department. If you have all of the academic and scholarly knowledge in whatever field, and it's not used to support the betterment of the everyday lives of people, which is called industry. And some people may not be able to make that correlation because they haven't studied economics. So I'm not going to give an economics lesson, but let me just say this. Let's say that Mary and Jimmy meet and they fall in love and they decide to marry, and they live in a rural area. And they have a little plot of land, maybe 50, 100 acres. And they decide they're going to grow beans and maybe some other vegetable that they can live off of. And maybe they might buy a couple of cows that they can milk for dairy products. And they might be able to scratch by and survive. But what about the clothes they're going to need? What about when they have children? What about the diapers they're going to need? They're going to have to be able to convert what they are used to raising to some medium of exchange, whether it's the barter system or cash or whatever, to buy these things. That's called industry. Simple. They're going to have to transform these raw products into some convertible method of being able to get the other things they need. That's industry. Now I'm teaching or telling you this because most Black people don't learn this in school. The only thing they want to do is most of us want to do is get a job, get a paycheck, and go to Walmart, Family Dollar, or some other store and buy what we need. But as a community, we end up being the ones that are always in debt because we don't know how to create capital. Booker Washington was very averse to getting in debt. He would do anything he could to avoid getting in debt because he realized that debt was another form of slavery. He had been a slave. He knew what it was to be somebody else's property, to have no say-so in whether you could move from the plantation. Don't you know that in most states, if you are heavily in debt and the bill collectors are trying to track you down and you leave the state because you are trying to avoid paying the debt, that's a crime? That you can actually be arrested for willfully trying to avoid paying a just debt by trying to evade having your wages attacked or having a process warrant served. So debt is a form of enslavement because it means you have to be staying in a place where you can be able to be collected from. But we don't think like that. As soon as you get to be juniors and seniors, we're flooded with credit card companies telling us to get this starter credit card. It used to be $300, now it's $2,000 or more. And immediately we want to buy whatever we like, whatever it might be. Some of us now, not me, but some college students, the break before they start their senior year, they'll take one of these credit cards and they'll take a trip to the Bahamas or the Caribbean. But if they start off their life with debt. Now here's my point, and I didn't mean to preach, but here's my point. What did Booker T. Washington mean? What does he mean for Tuskegee students in particular as future leaders? And you're already leaders. You in the what they call the talented temp. You already there at the top. But what does he want you to do with that? He wants you to set the example as the students during his time set the example of frugality, industry, capital building. And in conclusion, let me just say this. What was the first industry you read about when you read Up from Slavery? What was the first one? And some people may say the building or the molding of bricks, the making of bricks. That wasn't the first one. I mean, that's the one that's been publicized. But the first industry, and I'll make it quick, when they got to Tuskegee, when the students arrived at Tuskegee, there was no school. Now, Tuskegee had been out promoting a school. He'd been out in the community in the Macon County area with flyers that he had printed up, nice flyers, talking about this great school that he was inviting the students to come to. But when they got there, and he wasn't being deceitful, because the school was a concept, it was an idea. The people that invited him there, it doesn't appear they told him there was no school for him to teach at. He had to start the school. There was a church that the preacher allowed him to have classes in, and there was a converted chicken coop that he had classes in. But he wasn't dismayed. He wasn't disappointed. He was 25 years old, and he was very ambitious and very courageous. So the first industry, he went and he had somebody loan him some axes. A-X-E-S. Axes. A-X-E-S. Regular long handle axes to chop trees down. And the first industry was chopping down trees and learning how to make planks out of these trees to build a building for his school, converting raw materials into a finished product that was usable for a purpose, industry. And then later, they decided they wanted to make brick buildings, and they learned, Booker T. Washington had basically learned by trial and error how to mold and burn and how to do the bricks. And they built the buildings, some of which are still standing on that campus 100 and some years later. So whether you're going to go into social services, social sciences, engineering, architecture, the military, as a community, our people need to become mindful that the people that are successful in the world are the people that unite and build industries to supply their needs and hopefully the needs of others. Any questions? I'm going to stop right there. Dr. Daniels, I'll turn it back over to you for right now. I didn't mean to be so long, but I wanted to get that out. I'm sorry.
That's great. That's great. And I really appreciate how you broke down the understanding of industry, because you're speaking from 70 plus years of experience and life experience, and I can speak from 40 years of life experience, and the reality of if I can add something to what you just noted, and this is a conversation that I just had with my wife yesterday. She messed me up with this. We think about, we go to school. You spend, if you're Tuskegee or any other institution, you spend $150,000 to get your degree. If you're in a profession, then you have to spend money to get your experience, and you got to spend money on study materials, and you got to spend money on licensure and spend money on insurance. all these things that you're spending money on, you may be out of pocket $200,000 before you even get started with your life. But everybody's made money off of you in the process. And you may think that you arrived and you're now successful because you now have this degree or this license, but you've made an investment in yourself, but you've actually invested all your money in somebody else who's really come up and grown. And if you spend the rest of your time trying to pay that back, then really you've not created anything for yourself. You're not actually in the marketplace. You were just you basically have a debt. I mean, especially if you had to take out student loans. So that understanding of transforming what we think about into industry. I want to go back to a comment that you made in one of your previous lectures about the buying of, about ironing your shirts. You mentioned how there was a Korean cleaner around your area that went out of business, and you realized you were spending all this money with this Korean cleaner, and then you said, well, I was taught how to iron my own shirts, and you bought an iron. It wasn't too industrial strength, but big enough to be able to do your own ironing, and then started to go out and look for your own shirts. That speaks to that idea of being industrious. And it speaks to how we can begin to look at the work that we do coming out of Tuskegee and realizing that we don't have education, or we're not supposed to receive education for education's sake. We're not supposed to get it so we can stick our chests out and tell everybody, hey, look at me, I have a degree. You're supposed to get it so that you can be more industrious. You can, as the statute says, we will grow in proportion as we learn to glorify labor, but also putting brains and skill into the common occupations of life. So it's that brains and skill that we bring together that allows us to create industry. As you mentioned, that idea being prosperous. So what I would like to do is open it up, since the students have developed some questions. I'm going to open it up to the students to ask their questions, if that's okay, so that
Sure.
they've gotten a chance to really learn about Washington was and his legacy. And I believe these questions will really help them solidify their thoughts about it in their eyes. So I open the floor up to the first person. And please don't take too long. I'm gonna start calling people out if you do. So let's go, Mr. Scott.
Good morning. It is morning. But you spoke of being not a Black separatist, but I didn't really understand what that meant. Can you speak a little bit about what a Black separatist is?
Sure. Back in the 1960s, when I was a student at Tuskegee, I attended Tuskegee, which is called Tuskegee Institute, from September 1964 to June of 66, at which time I transferred to the University of California at Berkeley. At that time, what was known as the Black Power movement was in vogue. The civil rights movement, which sought as its goal full integration of the African-American people into the larger body politic of America, that was called a majority, which was 90% white with a mixture of Hispanic and Indian Americans. And it wasn't working. The pushback was not only hostile, but it was fatal. Martin Luther King was murdered. He was the main advocate of this integration program at that time. So young Turks, as they called them, people you may read about in history, like Stokely Carmichael, but primarily people led by a gentleman by the name of Elijah Poole, who had adopted the name Elijah Muhammad, said that integration would never work. We need to separate and build our own institutions, our own schools, our own hospitals, our own communities, our own businesses. And that took off, but it didn't really go far because most of the American people for generations had wanted to become part of the larger American community. They wanted integration badly. Yeah, badly. They allowed the children to go to schools because of federal mandates where they were humiliated. So this Black separatist movement outside of Elijah Muhammad's context began to grow in power and context and influence during the Black student movement in the 60s. You had Black community schools, you had Black community services, you had free clinics, you had a lot of things that Black people started bringing together, collaborating to do for themselves. And the idea was, let's leave the white world's influence and power and build for ourselves. Well, I was in the Black Nation of Islam for 6 years. I was an officer in that organization. I was head of the distribution of the propaganda newspaper called the Muhammad Speaks for a couple of years out in the West Coast. But most of our people didn't want that. And it turned out to be successful in many ways, but overall, it never did get any traction. So shortly after that, I enlisted for the purpose of becoming a candidate for the Navy Officer Chaplains Corps. But because of my faith, which is Islamic, that wasn't available to me because the government, the Congress hadn't authorized anyone to become a chaplain in that denomination. But I loved the enlisted work that they gave me, which is in telecommunications engineering. And I stayed for 24 years. But now I've left the separatist ideology and I've joined the increasingly diverse U.S. military. And after I finished, I went to a predominantly white institution to get a second bachelor's degree and went to predominantly white institutions to get advanced degrees. So this idea of separatism, though it ideally sounded like something, as they say, it looked good on paper, it didn't fit the realities of my needs in life. So I ended up becoming part of the integrationist societies, as most of you will. And I don't have a problem with that, although I realize the limitations. But you can break through those limitations as many people have done. It just means being 3 times or 4 times as good and working 5 times as hard and never giving up. So to address your question, when I talk about separatism, I'm talking about an idea that was in vogue during the 60s and early 70s. But you don't hear too much about it anymore because it's really, at this time in history, not realistic. Did I answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I want to make sure that I'm complete, that I do answer the question. Hold on just a minute. I'm looking, okay. All right, thank you. I hope I did really answer your question. Okay, Dr. Daniels, did you want to ask someone else to speak?
Yes, who else has a question? If y'all don't throw them, I'm gonna call on you. All right, so Ms. Flowers. Ms. Flowers asked, growing up in the Tuskegee community, how did it impact you and what are the differences you see in the community now?
I looked at that question when Dr. Daniel sent that to me earlier. And of all of the questions, and they were all great questions, and I'll address however many Dr. Daniels asked me to respond to in the limited time we have left. But of all the questions, that was the one that affected me emotionally and psychologically the most profoundly. And that's because when I grew up in Tuskegee in the 40s and the 50s, the Tuskegee community, which is called Greenwood, was a model community for the Black or African-American people of the South, of the world, actually. We had industries there. I won't go into detail about what they were right now because in the interest of time, we had a thriving community. In fact, because of segregation, the presidents of Tuskegee during that time, there were two presidents that were over the administration of the school, Dr. Frederick D. Patterson and Dr. Luther H. Foster. And these were both forward-thinking people, but they were also considered the de facto mayors of the larger Black community. So the Tuskegee ethos affected the whole community. For an example, one of the things that Dr. Washington was a stickler about was to have beautifully manicured lawns on the campus, beautifully pruned and trimmed trees, and spotless buildings, and no paper. You would not find a scrap of paper on the lawns ever. It was put into the hearts of the students to take such pride in our campus that if you saw a chewing gum wrapper on the sidewalk, you would immediately pick it up and put it in the trash. That's who we were. And that extended out into the community. So our community was so beautiful that even white people sometimes surreptitiously would drive through there, and in one way they would admire, look what these Negroes have done. And in another way, they would be jealous. And they would say, how, and I'm sort of putting these words into the white people's mouth, how did these Negroes that we trained to think they were nothing but cattle, that less than animals in value, reach the level of self-value that they live in these beautiful homes? Because one of the industries that was developing when I was a child was the building of homes. Tuskegee graduates who had been taught to build beautiful homes. They had built those older buildings on the campus, some of which are still standing. Many, almost all of the old buildings were designed by the namesake of your school, Robert R. Taylor. And then now this building trades expertise is transferred to building beautiful homes that the white people marvel at. So growing up in that kind of environment where community excellence in every single way was the standard, it affected every aspect of my life. I won't go into detail about what I accomplished because of that, but everybody who grew up in Tuskegee during that time was imbued with the idea of excellence, which had been put there by not only Booker T. Washington, but the people that he brought to Tuskegee that reinforced that idea that we can be the model for the world of people who come up from slavery, chattel slavery, and people from all over the world, from China, from Japan, from South America, from all parts of Africa, and even from Europe, would come to Tuskegee and study the work and study the students and marvel at this transformation. And it affected not only people in the school, but a whole community of people. I hope that answers the question because it certainly affected me in my life. Now, let me add one thing, Dr. Anderson, because I didn't finish. I just realized all of that was lost, sadly. Just a conversation for another time, but let me just try to put a pin on it by saying in the 70s and 80s, because of the Black Power movement and other intervening factors, the Booker T. Washington ethos began to die. It has not come back yet. Dr. Daniels is one of the main people that I admire for working very hard to bring it back. And he is bringing it back, but it has not come back yet all the way. It still has a long way to go. But once that spirit died, the town of Tuskegee died. That's all I say.
Sure. I'm going to, Zoe Hines asked, how has being the great grandson and oldest male living descendant of Dr. Booker T. Washington impacted your life, either positively or negatively? Was there any advice or saying that was ingrained in you by your family that you live by?
I answer the last part of the question first. Excuse me, just one second. I don't see it much now as I'm older and my hair is turning white. But when I was a child, my family, friends, or my grandmother in particular, who was the daughter-in-law of Booker T. Washington, that's my grandmother on my mother's side. She married Booker T. Washington's younger son. Told me that because I had the eyes, the complexion, if some facial features similar to Booker T. Washington, not 100%, that I had the responsibility of carrying out his work. I won't say that they saw me as a reincarnation of Booker T. Washington, but they certainly saw me as the one to continue his work. So I grew up with that mission. I was always guided by understanding that his work was not finished. In fact, my grandmother told me he was 100 years ahead of his time, and I believe that. Well, I haven't achieved anything close to what he achieved, but I have endeavored, especially in the last 40 years, to promote what I was speaking about earlier, his concepts, because we need his concepts of economic and community development today more than ever before. And I'm in the waning years of my life, but I'm still, as we are having this conversation today, and I don't get around physically like I used to. Several times a year, I would travel to different places in the country to promote his message for today. But because of COVID and my health and other reasons, I don't do that, but I'm still doing it virtually by means like Zoom. But being part of who his life work is all about has been my mission in my life, to keep the train running down the progress track.
That actually will bring us to the question that Jada Sheely posed. And Ms. Sheely, let me see, is she,
I'm
you
on
hear me?
here. Yes.
Can you ask your question? I'm having a little difficulty understanding how you phrase it, but I think I know it's related to his book, Booker T. Washington and the New America. So if you could rephrase it or just state it for Professor Abuwi so we clearly understand what you're asking.
Okay, I had a two-part question. The first one was just kind of answer with the previous question, but what influence lives through you in the writing of the book and carrying out Washington's ideologies, his philosophies and everything? What is a new America for us, what the book is supposed to cover?
Well, let me answer the last part of the question. What is a new America? You know, you have the America that I grew up in as a child, segregation, racial oppression, lack of opportunities for full development, police intimidation, maybe not like it is today where young Black men and women are being shot down like, you know, I don't even want to use the term. But it was rough, it was hard. They still had lynchings. Emmett Till in 1955 is a glaring example. I was 12 years old when that happened. If you haven't learned about that, you should go up on the internet and find out about that. That's the old America. The America that started when the first slaves were brought over here and treated like animals, fed like animals, whipped like animals. That's the old America. I didn't grow up in that America, but Booker T. Washington did. He was a slave. He saw people treated like that. He wasn't personally treated like that, but he had relatives that were whipped like dogs. That's the old America. That's the reality of America. I'm a historian. I teach college history. In fact, right now I'm finishing up a course in American history. And these are the glaring realities that nowadays a lot of the politicians don't want us to teach. They don't want us to teach about old America. But the new America is the vision, trying for words in the preamble to the Constitution and World Declaration of Independence. But we haven't gotten there. In fact, Martin Luther said in August of 1963 that when we were given this promissory note of this new America, when we went to the bank to cash it, we found out we've been given a bad check because the people that ruled still wanted to keep the old America with a different face on it. But we're working hard. I remember hearing for the first time Maya Angelou's beautiful, beautiful epic poem, Still I Rise. Still I rise. So we're still rising to that beautiful city on the hill, which I called in my book, The New America. Does that answer your question to some extent?
It does.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna leave it open. If there's any, I'll give one more question to a student before we get out of here. And then I have, so I see Mr. Jones, he says, was you holding a standard since being Booker T. Washington's great grandson? Did that provide additional pressure to you when you were younger? I hope I got that right, Mr. Jones.
You want me to proceed?
Yes, go ahead.
It did. It did. But it wasn't just me. You have to understand, we have to understand something. That every child that I grew up with was the child of a superstar. Like for an example, one of my dear childhood friends, her father was a direct descendant of the man who Tuskegee was fortunate to have been brought to set up the health services department for the students to help ward off diseases. He was in charge of setting up sanitation standards in the cafeteria and the dormitories. And then as some time went by, Booker T. Washington was able to get funding from a white benefactor to build a hospital, which now has been converted into some other use over there. But the John A. Kennedy building, it used to be the John A. Andrew Hospital, Memorial Hospital. The John Andrew was the governor of Massachusetts during the Civil War that allowed the first Black soldiers to enlist to fight against the South. And the hospital was originally set up by the grandfather of Dr. Kennedy, John Howard Kennedy's grandfather. So you had people in my community whose parents were recruited, especially by Booker T. Washington, because they had the qualities in their respective professions and in their character. So being around children whose parents were also role models, and many people that I can talk about if I had time. I'll mention one other. You may be familiar with Dr. James H.M. Henderson. He's passed on now. At one time, there was going to be a building erected in his name. But he's an illustrious icon of brilliance and success in the field of botany and agriculture. And his father was one of the first Black men to establish prominence in Black intercollegiate athletics. He played on the basketball team at Howard and went on to develop the YMCA program in Washington, D.C. for Black young people, and went on to do many other things in the field of civil rights. He was an educator, an athlete, an icon of enduring all kinds of hostility and repression, but he never stopped. And his son, who is my second cousin, was the leader of the Boy Scout movement, the Black Boy Scout troop that he helped to establish in Alabama, in Tuskegee. And through his encouragement and his role modeling, I became an Eagle Scout, one of the first Black Eagle Scouts in the state of Alabama back in the 50s. And I'm not saying this to boast, I'm saying we had many role models that came to Tuskegee and participated in the work of molding young people like myself and my friend Diane Kennedy, the great-granddaughter of John Kennedy. So many. I'll go ahead and turn it back over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I see we have two guests with us today, Miss Judy Grisham and Ms. Verna Little. When I spoke with you yesterday, Professor Abuwi mentioned your affinity for Miss Little and growing up, and so I said I gotta invite Miss Little to your presentation. And then Ms. Gresham and I spoke last night, and I said I got to make sure she gets to come as well. So I'm going to open it up if either of them would like to ask a question or even just make a comment.
Well, I would like to say thank you for the invitation. I'm sorry that I didn't respond any sooner, but I had a prior commitment at 8 this morning as well. But I think it is a privilege to see our, the descendant of Booker T. Washington here, to be able to speak to the students so they can benefit from the knowledge, the expertise, as well as all the information that he's sharing. I think we should hear more of him later and maybe at another event as well. I want to just say thank you for the invitation. I do not have many questions for him, but one in particular I'd like to know would be, what would you like to see that you have not observed? Hopefully you didn't mention that already, for the future of Tuskegee University, based on what your forefathers have already instigated, and we are benefiting from the past as we enhance this for the future. Are there anything, one thing in particular that you would like to see, or are there several? And if you've already mentioned that within the few minutes that you began, I apologize.
Well, first of all, Ms. Little, our friendship goes back decades. And I'm so honored that you are on the program today, and I'm particularly honored by your question. I'll try to be as succinct as possible. So let me just start by saying this. When I was growing up at Tuskegee, one of the most outstanding and iconic physical features of the campus, it still may be standing, I don't know, was a very, 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 very tall tower. It is actually a smokestack or a steam release tower. It's over there in the vicinity, I think, of James Hall, back down a little bit further. And that was the central power plant for the whole campus. They had a way of bringing in water, converting it to steam, and the steam was able to drive the electrical plant. It was able to heat all of the buildings through underground piping. So you had lights and heat. We didn't have air conditioning back in those days, but you had heat. The buildings were always nice and warm. And the students built that. Booker T. Washington brought in Black people because they were great advances made by Black people during that time. You didn't have to go outside the Black community to find the expertise to teach the students how to build that steam plant, that power plant. And it became a model for power plants throughout the South, Tuskegee. But the next part of it is, and this has always fascinated me because you don't hear much about it. The primary means of transportation back in those days was horse and buggy and wagons. Tuskegee had an industry of building the very best wagons and horse and buggies in the South. People would come from all over the South to put in orders. I'm talking about white businesses for those wagons and horse and buggies. There was an industry among the other industries, which we know about the brick building. We don't know a lot about the mattress making and the textile manufacturing. And so Tuskegee, though they got a lot of donations, they were able to become, to some extent, not 100%, self-sufficient. So I would like to see Tuskegee get back into the frame of mind of becoming a university that developed industrial talent, so we can, as Booker T. Washington said many times, not consumers, but producers, not employees only, but captains of industry, because that's what's going to set Tuskegee apart from its competitors for the best and the brightest students. And in closing, I want to say this. And of course, when I went to Tuskegee, we had a few white professors, and I'm thankful for one of them particularly that inspired me to become a history professor. But I think all of the students who are African American, well, that's already changing. But to be honest with you, when Booker T. Washington was there, they had white students there, they had Chinese students there, they had Japanese students there, they had African students there, they had South American students there. And that's where Tuskegee is headed. But these people are not going to come. And listen, I have several degrees in the liberal arts, including a doctorate minus my dissertation being completed in higher education. But these students are going to come because they want to be able to learn industrial skills to take back to their slowly developing nations and build these nations so they can have a first world standard of living. I think that's enough for that, Ms. Little.
Oh, thank you very much for that. And I know you could expound even more. And I do recall, and I won't take much more of your time either, Dr. Daniels, but Marshall spoke to Tuskegee University, I think, was it 2010?
I believe, I'm not sure, I believe.
If there's any way for the students or you to check with archives or whatever, to just hear how he spoke to the university during that time. It was very thought-provoking. And I'm sure the students would enjoy it. But thank you again for your response. We appreciate all you do, all you continue to do for Tuskegee University and your family. And I'm just happy to be a part of your family as well.
I'm so happy to be with you on this program. Thank you so much, Ms. Little.
And so Ms. Little, we recorded it, so I'll make sure you get a copy of the recording as well.
Thank you.
Definitely. And thank you for being here. And so with that, we're gonna close out. We're at time. And I think it's
I'm
very
hoping that
fitting.
will
Oh,
I
yes.
get
Yes. I didn't know if you were still wanting
Yeah,
to say
I
something.
definitely would like to say something quickly. I just wanted to say hello to Dr. Washington and Professor Abuwi, one of my dear friends. I met Marshall Abuwi about 7 years ago, and we have been dear friends. He's included me in the family, and he has been one of my teachers. I've learned so much from him, and just been a breath of fresh air. We both grew up in Tuskegee along with Verna. Verna, I'm so happy to see you as well. And I just wanted to hold up the book. I have a personal copy that was signed, and this is something we all need to invest in the book and make sure that we have it. And I'm just happy. I'm proud of you. You're looking great. And thank you so much. I can't even begin to tell you how much I've enjoyed. And thank you, Dr. Daniels, for inviting me, because I've been mostly a part of these classes and seen Dr. Washington speak, and he really has a lot to give. And so I'm just looking forward to more to come.
And let me interject before you close out. I actually revised the book, the book that Judy just showed you. I revised it. So I'm trying to get a good picture. This is actually the revised.
Right.
Look, this is actually the revised. The content is pretty much all the same, but I did revise it. So if you order the book, and you can go to Dr. Daniels, and he can put you in touch with me, and I will send you a free copy of the book. The book normally sells when I go out on speaking tours for $20 at the table, but I will send you a free copy of the book. Just to get with Dr. Daniels so I can get your address, and I'll send it to you. But thanks for bringing that up, Judy. Okay, Dr. Daniels, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. Ms. Hollins, did you have a question?
It's not so much as a question. I just wanted to say to Professor Abuwi, hi, first off, I'm Jeremiah Hollins, a third-year chemistry major. And on this call the entire time, I was trying to figure out where your face looks so familiar. And I'm from Augusta, Georgia. And I think a while back, I was somewhere and you were talking. I cannot remember where, and it's killing me. But I met you like a long time ago. And I just want to say everything that you've been saying on this call has been very insightful. And I would love to hear more. So I wanted to know if I could possibly know the church that you preach at and meet you. I come home this summer and I would love to meet you in person and get a copy from you in person instead of ordering it.
We'll work it out. Just get with Dr. Daniels, get my contact information, and when you get home, just let me know where you're going to be, and I'll let you know where I'll be speaking, and we can get a chance to renew that acquaintance. And you may have seen me at Augusta University, but I do get out in the community and speak as well. But yeah, just let Dr. Daniels know how I can reach you, and we'll get in contact.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I can't say any more. I'd say definitely the last three folks who spoke wrap it up. What's the direction for us as an institution, realizing that we're really following, as Ms. Little noted, we're following in the footsteps and the guidance of our forefathers, of which Professor Abuwi's forefather, Dr. Washington, and Marshall Cabiness, Mr. Marshall Cabiness Washington, Marshall Cabiness set a stage for us to follow. And the beautiful thing about this is that Tuskegee, in under Dr. Washington's leadership, left so many, they talk about breadcrumbs. That brother left a whole bakery for us to follow. We don't have to try to figure it out. his blueprint for how Tuskegee got started, and the types of people, as Professor Abuwi noted, that came through here. They were rock stars. And just like with this class, as we've dug into Dr. Washington's legacy, every single person that has been affiliated with this institution has a legacy that's just as long. And Professor Abuwi noted Kenny Hall. I just found out that Mr. Kenny was responsible for bringing the VA here. And when he left the VA, when he left Tuskegee, because he was actually pushed out of Tuskegee because he was bringing the VA hospital here. And that's another story for another time. But he then went to New Jersey and started a hospital in New Jersey, in Newark, New Jersey. And my wife is from Newark. I grew up in Newark, lived in Newark. And to know that we had a Black professor, Black doctor who came out of Tuskegee, came to Newark to establish a hospital there, we got work to do. And I thank Professor Abuwi for his gems of knowledge. I really hope everyone took great notes because he pretty much gave us our marching orders for how we move forward. And based on Ms. Gresham and Ms. Little, their acknowledgement, there's a lot of love. There's a lot of love for the community of Tuskegee. There's a lot of love for the relationships that were built growing up in this space. And we have an opportunity to restore that level of grandeur back because it's been waning for some years, and it doesn't have to wane any longer. So with that, I want to thank everyone for being here. For those that are in the class, please stay behind so I can let you know what the final exam requirements are. And then for Ms. Gresham, Ms. Little, Professor Abuwi, I can't thank y'all enough. You don't know how much this means to me to have not only the university, the community, and direct descendants of Dr. Washington in this room with our students to understand the love that we have for our space, community, and university as one. So thank you all. I wish everyone continued health and wealth, and I'll be in contact with everyone soon.
Kwesi,
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Dr. Daniels, can you hear me for just
Yes,
a
ma'am.
second?
Yes.
I don't know if you all will be able to see this, the students, but this is a picture of, it's in the yearbook that I found and I shared. I'm gonna try. This is a picture of Marshall Cabiness when he was a student at Tuskegee, and all I can do is see if we can get any kind of.
It's nice.
That is a picture of him. I think he was maybe the student government president, or what was
No,
that?
I was sophomore class president.
Yeah, so I just thought I would share that before we
Right.
end.
Thank you.
I enjoyed. Have a good day, everybody. Good luck,
Thank you. You
students.
too.
Yes, hope you much success, students. Love you all.
Yeah.
Love you all.
Love you all. And
You're doing a great job, Dr. Daniels. Thank you for doing this for all of the alums of Tuskegee. We appreciate it, and I know Booker T. Washington is smiling.
yes, and I'm going to sign off now so you can continue with your housekeeping chores for the class. But thank you so much, Dr. Daniels, and thank all of you.
Thank you.